A suddenly surging Northeastern takes on the number 6 team in the country in the Hockey East game of the week. That number 1 versus number 2 weekend has set the stage for a big-time Beanpot, and the hottest team in college hockey might just be in Women's Hockey East right now. That's all coming up on This Week in Hockey East. Hey everybody, big week ahead. So glad you're with us with Eric Galanti. I'm Tyler Murray. Let's dive right into it, Eric. The game of the week, you and Jim Connolly will be on site. Matthews Arena, all of a sudden feels like a really big game, Northeastern against number 6 Maine.
Yeah, how about Northeastern, and how big was Tuesday night on a national stage to beat BU in overtime, taking advantage of a power play? And this is a win that Northeastern has been desperate for and right on the doorstep of, it feels like, for a while now. They've now taken advantage of a stretch of this 4 out of 5 at home. It'll be 6 out of 7 at home overall. They've won 4 of 5 in that 6 of 7 stretch now, with Maine to conclude it on Friday. The big thing here is Northeastern's had all these opportunities against ranked opponents. And I go back to what Jerry Keefe said. A couple of people have cited this quote on X that, he talked about after that Quinnipiac game. I don't know if we've turned a corner because we're not yet winning these games, even though it feels like we're getting close in these games. Well, they finally win one. Yesterday was the 6th one-goal game or less, if you kind of tie, against a ranked team this year. It's the first time Northeastern won one of those 6 games. They've now had 3 games in a row before this one against ranked teams, 1 goal or less. Quinnipiac, BU on the road, and UMass. They've now won one against BU. It's worth noting this series is kind of oddly placed to accommodate a series earlier this year with North Dakota going to BU. That's why we have these Tuesday games. But the big thing for Northeastern, a couple things. Number one, I thought Cam Whitehead was awesome Tuesday night, especially early in that game when BU did have a lot of opportunities and felt like we're really cooking. Whitehead was excellent. He ends up making 38 saves. And Northeastern, between Whitehead and their defense overall, is playing their best defense of the season right now. They've only allowed 10 goals over their last 5 games. That's the fewest they've allowed in any 5-game stretch this season. Whitehead has a .936 save percentage over those 5. And now, all of a sudden, Northeastern is 1 win away, 1 3-point win away from moving out of the opening round of the Hockey East playoffs, despite a little bit of a slow start. So they're getting healthy at the right time. They've been known to be pretty good this time of year with a certain tournament coming up on Monday, which we'll talk about a little later. So it feels like Northeastern's rounding into form. One more note, Jack Williams is probably the guy in the top 10 in Hockey East in points that we don't talk about enough. You look at his numbers, he has 28 points now, which puts him in the top 10 entering play on Friday. 3 goals, 3 assists in his last 6 games. He has 25 points in his last 15 games overall. That's all but 3 of his points this year, so he's been really good recently. So those are a couple of things on Northeastern. Maine was off last weekend. They have an interesting trip this week. They'll play Northeastern Friday and then go out to Amherst and play UMass on Saturday. It's only the second time this season, second and final time this season, that Maine won't play the same opponent on back-to-back nights. So obviously some teams certainly do that. It's a little bit rarer for Maine, but that's what they'll do this weekend. The biggest thing to note from Maine is they've started using both goalies recently. So you look at Albin Boya, the freshman from Sweden, who's been really good. And this is more about him earning more time rather than Osman losing the net. It's really just Boya's been really good. He's played 50-plus minutes in 4 of the last 6 games since the start of January. He's only allowed 6 goals in that span. He has a .936 save percentage over that time. So they're now kind of splitting weekends so far. We'll see what they decide to do this weekend. And the other one thing I want to talk about, we've mentioned the Nadeau brothers. They deserve it. They've been really good. How about Harrison Scott here? A hat trick in his last game, Saturday the 20th against Lowell. He now has goals in 7 of his last 10 games. He has 11 points over his last 10. So that's adding another piece to this Maine offense, which does score a little bit more at home than they do on the road, but still a chance to end kind of a crazy streak. Maine has not won at Matthews Arena in 15 tries. They haven't won since 2012. So they try to break that streak on Friday in our game of the week, Friday night on Mesa.
And I can't wait, too, for the reunion, I guess, of Ben Barr and Greg Carvel. What a coaching tree Greg Carvel has developed. Ben Barr is the star right now. Everyone's so impressed with how quickly he's turned around Maine, almost as quick as Greg Carvel helped turn around UMass. And this week, Greg Carvel, he simplified it. He said, Ben Barr just did what we did. He got a first-round pick, and he made the most of it. So Cale McCarr, the example in Amherst.
Year 3, right? Year 3.
Here they go. Keep an eye on it. So that's going to be a fun matchup as well. UMass playing two different opponents this weekend, obviously, with Merrimack Friday, which is always a tight game, and then Maine coming into the Mullen Center. We teased maybe the hottest team in college hockey, and I think it's the UConn Huskies on the women's side right now. They got a home Friday and Saturday on ESPN+. They're taking on Providence, who's heating up as well, but UConn's just on an unbelievable tear. Yeah, it's hard to remember. They started Hockey East play 0-3, but they haven't lost since. They are 14-0-2 in their last 16 conference games. They're in first place by 5 points, clear of Boston College, and they have a game in hand on the Eagles with 8 to go. So they're in a good spot, and it's because of their defense lately. Top 5 defense in the country, allowing less than a goal and a half per game. And whether it's Tia Chan or Megan Warner in net, they're just not giving up goals right now. 3 consecutive shutouts. They've allowed 2 goals or fewer in every conference game since October 13th. That's 17 in a row. And it's been a collective effort. I'll give you the example last weekend against Vermont. It's a good Catamount team that averages 24 shots per game. But across the whole weekend, 6 periods plus overtime, they get just 31 shots on goal against UConn across those 2 games. They don't score at all. And maybe you think, okay, block shots, not quite. UConn's in the bottom half of the league in that department. They're just making it really tough to get to high danger areas and giving other teams any kind of confidence to try to shoot it on goal. So big tip of the cap to what UConn's been able to do. Can they keep it going, though, against Providence? They're on a major roll since going to Belfast in the Friendship Series. They're 5-0-1 in the 6 games since coming back stateside. We talked about this a few weeks ago, but 2 seasons ago, Matt Kelly really able to flip the switch for Providence. They started that year 8-12-5, finished 7-1-1, and got back to over 500 by the end of the year. It's happening again, Eric. They just took 4 of 6 points from BC last weekend, a win and a shootout loss. And their weekend against Vermont a few weeks ago, that was a perfect example of a team that knows how to win in different ways. They sweep the series. Game 1, it's 6-0. Game 2, Providence wins 4-3 in overtime. Who might be able to break through against this UConn defense? That's probably going to decide who wins the series. Look out for Audrey Knapp for the Friars. 5 goals in the 6 games since they got back from Belfast. She's now your team leader with 11 goals. Lindsay Bachna, she was doing the little things early. 1 goal in her first 16 games. But lately, she says, all right, let me join the scoring. She's averaging a goal per game in the last month, Lindsay Bachna. So fantastic work from her and Knapp. And they really joined some other players who've been doing it all year. Bachna scored twice against Boston College last Saturday. The first goal of that game, and then the last goal, not an empty netter, a big goal to help them get a 2-goal lead. So big performance from her, and a lot of star power is brewing for Matt Kelly's team in Providence. We'll see if they can break through against the Huskies this weekend.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. You mentioned that UConn does have a game in hand against Boston College. The one thing they don't have is the tiebreaker, and that's still Boston College's best thing that they have on their resume this year as they go into another BCBU weekend. The Eagles and the Terriers will be at Walter Brown Arena Friday night, and then we'll have it for you on Nesson on Saturday. BC and BU, which will be the 4th time that they've played this year by the time we get to Saturday. BU, a little bit of a get-right weekend again, right? They got swept by Holy Cross last weekend, which we've seen Holy Cross do to some teams this year, limiting their goal scoring. It's interesting here with BU because they just wrapped up a stretch where they played 9 games in 20 days, starting January 8th, rolling through a couple of midweeks that had to be made up, the Beanpot games mixed in then. So from the 8th to the 27th, they played 9 games. This is the first week that they have not had a midweek since the first week of December in terms of when they were actually playing. So maybe a nice respite here to have a little bit of a normal week for BU. That's number 1, after, of course, making it to the Beanpot final and losing in overtime to Northeastern. It's all about scoring for BU. Their shot numbers have been there all year long. It's can they finish? If you look at the stretch that they played last week against Holy Cross and then in the Beanpot final against Northeastern, they only scored 4 goals in 3 games. The prior week in 3 games, they scored 13 goals. So is the offense, where is it? How is it finishing? That's the biggest thing for BU right now. For Boston College, I will fully admit that I was surprised by this. When they lost to Providence on Saturday, that was their first loss since November 25th. Now, obviously they lost shootouts in both games to BU in the Beanpot semis and to Harvard in the Beanpot consolation. But remember, those are officially just ties. So you look at all the things they've done, even though it doesn't necessarily feel that way, BC had not lost from November 25th until last Saturday in regulation. So I think they're probably playing a little bit better than maybe we're giving them credit for. Molly Jordan's been really good here recently. Over her last 5 games, she has 4 goals, 4 assists for 8 points. She had goals in both games against Providence. So the Eagles, who did have some ties in there during that stretch, it's worth noting, beyond even the 2 Beanpot games, will try to bounce back against their arch rivals from BU this weekend. That should be fun. And again, we'll have it Saturday as part of the Game of the Week package on Nesson. Now, speaking of BCBU, it was only 1 week ago, even though it feels like a lifetime ago, that these two teams just wrapped up an incredible series. And it's only a few days before they will once again play in the Beanpot, which already is coming on Monday. And this is our chance to preview Beanpot a little bit. We spent a lot of time previewing these two teams last week, so we won't go quite as in-depth today. But Tyler, you just watched 120 minutes of hockey between these teams. What were some things that stood out last week that you think will be important for the rematch on Monday night?
I keep going back to 3 names for Boston College. And before we dive in, it's a busy time of the year for BU with the schedule, but worth noting they're okay with it. Tuesday's game against Northeastern, that was moved there to accommodate the series with North Dakota from the start of November. So, this is something they've geared up for throughout the year. But Team USA's line, that second line, you could certainly talk about them. But the 3 names I keep coming back to, Eric, Cutter Gauthier, Jacob Fowler, Jakob Bankston. Okay, I'll tell you why. First, Cutter Gauthier, couple of huge goals. He broke the tie on Saturday late in the second. He had the empty netter to put it away on Friday, but his biggest impact was defensively. Greg Brown, after Friday's game, said they challenged Gauthier to defend Macklin Celebrini, and he held the top NHL draft prospects without a point until the final 2 minutes of the entire weekend. Now, Celebrini, you saw him on Tuesday. You give him any kind of room, he's going to make you pay. But Gauthier just didn't give him as many opportunities as we're used to seeing. So he's becoming a much more complete player than I think any of us realized after a stellar freshman year and a great first half to his second year. Jacob Fowler answered every question you could have had about him in net, really shined on that penalty kill like you've been talking about all year, Eric. And these were momentum-shifting moments on Saturday at Agganis. BU had 6 power plays, and they helped get energy back into that building. It was 2-0 BC halfway through the first period. The crowd's out of it, but then you send an Eagle to the box, place goes nuts. And if you're a BC fan in the building, it's going from party mode to I don't want to be around anymore. So Fowler steps up big time for BC. He gets 12 of the next 13 shots stopped by BU on the power play. Yes, Shane LeChance capitalizes on a final minute chance in the first, but overall, Fowler then stopped 23 of the next 25 shots to seal the win. So those two numbers, it's 92, 93%. That's not going to break any records. But for a freshman, his first time on the road in this rivalry, I was just blown away with the situational saves for Jacob Fowler. You can get overwhelmed and overpowered by this BU team. It's happened to a lot of goaltenders with more experience than Fowler this year. But even though they gave up that 2-goal lead, they never gave it back. And a big reason why, Jakob Bankston. For me, he was the revelation of the weekend. Greg Brown said Friday was maybe his best game of the year. I thought we called his name even more on Saturday. Every loose puck in his own end, every time you have a top prospect terrier getting into the slot, there's that big, long stick of Bankston to knock it away, throw his body in front of it. And then on Saturday, he has the primary assist on 2 big goals, the Gustafsson to give him a 2-0 lead goal, and then the counterattack, back and forth passing on the 2-on-1 with Will Smith. So Jakob Bankston, grad transfer from Lake Superior State, maybe not the big headline acquisition of the season for Greg Brown, but wow, fantastic stuff from him. And those 3 teenagers we talked about for Team USA, 4 points on Friday combined, 4 points on Saturday combined, a literal another day in the office for those 3, Smith, Leonard, and Perreault. That's their combined average this season, 4 points a game. Quickly on BU, it's a disappointing stretch, but I mean, if you're an eternal Terrier optimist, you can make an argument that they could have been the team coming out on top in both of those games. They had 3 posts on Friday, a couple of chances late to tie the game. That was essentially a 2-1 game with those 2 empty net goals, making it 4-1. But I'll credit Jay Pandolfo for not saying, oh, we got unlucky. He said we got bad bounces with those posts, but we have to create more bounces by getting to the net front. They did that a little more on Saturday. It made for a better game and a better showing from BU, but it still wasn't quite enough. And what both coaches talked about was those guys on the other side, they're way too talented to give them any kind of opportunities. And you just saw even the smallest chance, the smallest window for those goals from Perreault on Friday, Gauthier on Saturday. Those essentially changed the game. They won the game for BC, and those were odd man rushes or guys just left alone in great scoring areas. So if you find a way to tighten that up, easier said than done, then it's the coin flip Beanpot marquee matchup I think we're all excited to see on Monday.
Yeah, two other things that stood out. Number one on BU, especially Saturday, Lane Hudson was over 30 minutes. Macklin Celebrini was over 27 minutes. They're playing a lot of guys, and especially those top guys. So BU had 5 skaters over 20 minutes on Saturday. BC only had 2. It's not a huge thing, but Hudson again played 30 minutes on Tuesday against Northeastern. It's worth watching. He's playing a lot. It's not that he isn't capable of it, because he sure is. And he's one of their best players, so he should be on the ice a lot. But it is worth noting is they do play a lot of games kind of in a short window here, number one. And then I think the other thing was Boston College's power play, which, again, it didn't score at a rate that like completely blew you away. But that grouping of their 4 first-rounders, Smith, Perreault, Leonard, Gauthier, and then Eamon Powell, between the 2 games and just a little over 6 minutes of power play time, 17 shot attempts, 11 shots on goal. Northeastern also had a couple of opportunities on the power play. So I think for BU, whose penalty kill was really, really strong going into that series, something to watch there. BU's power play obviously was pretty good as well. But both, that's just something to watch. How many opportunities are they giving that top power play group for Boston College? On the other Beanpot game, we talked a lot about Northeastern a little earlier. It's kind of fascinating. Northeastern's record, probably a little bit underwhelming this year compared to where they want. Harvard's record, certainly a little underwhelming this year. One of those 2 teams is going to be in the final. It's the luck of the draw. It's the way it works in terms of this year. Just a quick note on Harvard for folks who maybe haven't seen them this year. You'll see the 4 wins. It'll jump out. 3 of those 4 wins are in the last 2.5 weeks, number one. Number 2, Harvard now finally their offense is coming. They've been really, really banged up. It's only like 3 weeks ago they were dressing 11 forwards and 5 defensemen. They're getting a little bit healthier. They've now scored 16 goals in their last 4 games after they scored only 30 in their first 15 games. Now that does include a 0 against Cornell, and they have a very difficult task on Friday against Quinnipiac. But just note, don't totally go by the record with Harvard. They are playing a little bit better here, and you have to play Harvard 5-on-5 because their power play is still a top 5 power play unit. Classic Harvard power play of what we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years. So that's a little bit of a Beanpot preview. And now it's time to take a few short shifts, brought to you by the Shift Group, helping elite athletes and veterans become elite sales professionals. Tyler, where are we starting?
Let's take a look at UNH men's hockey, a big game coming up for them on Friday. And it's the aforementioned BU Terriers coming into town. And I think no matter what, UNH, they have to feel so great about how this season has gone. They've put in the work. They've done a great job recruiting. The fans have showed up. A successful season for the Wildcats, but they don't just care about wins and losses. This is a team with those aspirations, of course. Mike Susan knows when he was a player just what the ceiling of this program is, and that's getting to the Frozen Four. But entering this weekend, they are 16th in the pairwise. So they're going to have to move up, and a real chance to do so against BU. They've been in or around the top 10 in the pairwise all year, essentially, thanks to those big wins over BU and Quinnipiac back in October. But this is where it gets tough, Eric, because they're playing pretty well, but the last 2 weekends they have had to settle for series splits against UConn and UVM. Those 2 series were almost identical, and if you're a UNH fan, you probably come away thinking you could have had all 6 points both weekends. In the wins against UConn and Vermont, the offense is rolling. 5-0 win over the Huskies in Game 1 of that series. 6-3 win over the Catamounts in Game 2 of that series. Both losses in their respective weekends, same score, 2-1, and same story. They dominate the shot battle. They double up Vermont 32-16 on the road, but lose. Then they outshoot UConn 44-24 at home, but lose. It's reminiscent of the loss to Army, who they outshot 45-14, but they dropped the final score 6-3. That loss really narrowed their margin for error for the rest of the year, but The pairwise does not care about shot numbers the way This Week in Hockey East does. So we're going to find out if they can find a way to beat Matthew Caron and upset BU for the second time this season. So, yes, I know it's not gangbusters right now for UNH like it was earlier in the year, but as we'd love to do, look beyond that final score. They're playing some really good hockey. We'll see if it shows up in the goal column against BU on Friday.
And the schedule does not get easier for UNH. Remember, they still have to play Boston College 3 times down the stretch of this season. Let's talk about the UNH women. We've talked a lot about them the last few weeks. They play Northeastern once again in a Thursday, Saturday, home and home this weekend. It's important to note here, UNH, finally, the offense was the thing that was the big catalyst last week. Last weekend against Maine, 8 goals in 2 games. That was their most goals in a 2-game stretch since the opening weekend of the season. But remember, Northeastern has only lost 1 game in their last 12 going into this weekend, including their Beanpot title. They've been very stingy defensively. Northeastern is knocking on the door of those top 2 spots in Hockey East. UNH is still right there with Providence, a red-hot Providence team around the 4 spot, looking at home ice, looking to avoid dropping down into the first round. So really interesting stuff this weekend. Can UNH keep it going after a nice weekend against Maine?
And there's so much going on the last few weeks. It's easy to forget, maybe if you're a college diehard, that it's NHL All-Star Weekend coming up, including a great 3-on-3 showcase we just saw on Thursday for the PWHL. And we saw 6 different Hockey East stars represented in that event. Alex Carpenter, Kendall Coyne-Schofield, Aaron Frankel, Megan Keller, Alina Mueller, and Marie-Philippe Poulin. And on the men's side, 12 Hockey East alums named to All-Star Weekend, college hockey alums named to All-Star Weekend, 9 Hockey East players: Thatcher Demko, Jack Eichel, Connor Hellebuck, Clayton Keller, just to name a few, Jeremy Swayman, and then, you got Jim Montgomery, a former Maine star. He's going to be a coach of one of those 4 teams as part of a revamped All-Star Weekend. And it's just a great reminder of how many great moments Hockey East has created and how many players have come through the conference to just be absolute stars, maybe guys who came in unheralded. Of course, Cale Makar, a high draft pick, but from year 1 to year 2 for him, it was an absolute transformation. People will tell you out in Amherst. So it also gets you excited about who's next. I mean, we have seen a whole lot of NHL caliber players this year, and can't wait to see that number continue to grow, I'm sure, for Hockey East guys in All-Star Weekend. What's next for us? Well, we'll be previewing a Beanpot championship game. It'll either be BU or BC against either Northeastern or Harvard, and a whole lot more to dive into as our coverage continues on a historic 40th season in Hockey East. Can't wait to talk to you next week on This Week in Hockey.